y'all brought your Bibles, or your phone, or your iPad, or your Galaxy, or your Nook, I guess. We still have Nooks, I don't know. Or if you're old-fashioned, you brought the Bible with paper in it. Okay, we're in chapter 5. We're going to finish up Peter tonight, 1 Peter. Next week, I'm going to start something I did a few years ago, a series like this, and so some of y'all may remember some of it. But I just think it's so relevant in what we got going on and doing. And it's a series I did called Margins, Create Margins in Your Life. And I think it'll really help all of us, but for the younger guys, it's really will help you a lot if you get it and pay attention about creating margins in your life. And it'll help all of us. But we're going to do that, and so it'll have handouts and all those things, I'm pretty sure. Y'all can cut me down a little bit. I'm loud. As long as that video is good, I don't really need a whole lot. When I'm standing up front, it's kind of hard. As long as everybody's comfortable, I'm good. So we're in chapter 5, and chapter 5 is Peter, but he's been talking to this church that's suffering a great deal. Good to have everybody that's watching on YouTube tonight. And so he ends this letter with how we conduct ourselves in the family of faith, how that we conduct ourselves in the community of faith or in the church. Okay, at this time, the church is kind of just forming. But he begins to tell us how to do that. So Peter instructs the young congregation here in how they should treat one another. And he starts with those that have authority, and then he works his way backwards to those that are submitting to the authority. And so he talks about authority within the church. Because in the kingdom of God, those in authority have responsibility to operate at a different level than those that are under that authority. And so he's going to talk. And when he says authority, he's not necessarily, I'm going to move, Rob. He's not necessarily talking about just the pastor as far as what we know it, because in that time they are just coming into that. There's really more the disciples, the apostles, and they did have pastors. Timothy was a pastor, but they're coming into that. But he's talking about those that are leading in ministry. And so he's talking about their responsibility and kind of going back to what Jesus said when he said, to the more that's given, the more is required of you. And so Peter begins to talk about that. So we're going to read. Let's read verses 1 through 5. He says, "And the elders therefore among you I exhort, who am a fellow elder, and a witness of the suffering of Christ, who am also a partaker of the glory that shall be revealed. Tend to the flock of God, which is among you, exercising the oversight, not of constraint, but willingly, according to the will of God, nor yet for filthy lucre but with a ready mind, neither as lording it over the charge allotted to you, but making yourself an example to the flock. And when the chief shepherd shall be manifest, ye shall receive a crown of glory that fadeth not away. Likewise, ye younger, be subject unto the elders, yea, all of you, gird yourselves with humility to serve one another, for God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace to the humble." Okay? So he starts off by talking about elders. The word elders here is preboteros, and it means counsel or councilman or councilwoman. It really is neutral, gender neutral. Or a mature person, officer, or even older person. And we do call older adults elders sometimes. sometimes are the, elderly they would be, but this is in a respectful way. Elderly is not always respectful, but elders. And so it is also used for pastors, even though pastors in the Greek is presbyter, it's a little different word. But Peter here even exhorts himself as an elder in the church, though he was not really a pastor. So we see it's kind of a wide range when he says elders. Sometimes we get caught up in that word elder and we think, well, okay, that means, the pastor or the staff or that means, a few in the church. But really there's a wide range of what's going on. Peter is really kind of talking to a wide group of people, those that are mature in the Lord, those that are deacons, counselors, those that are team leaders, whatever the case may be. Leadership within the church is kind of where he's talking about. And he says to the elders of this church, they've witnessed this suffering in Christ, and they've witnessed going through all of this. He said, but because you've done that, and because you've been stable, because you've went through that suffering, you're going to be partakers of the glory of God, which is a very eschatological statement, because it's an end time statement that glory may not come now, but that glory is going to come. And that's important for us to understand, especially in leadership in the church, because what we're doing is not always rewarded openly here. And sometimes we get caught up in that. We get caught up in the open reward here, but we have to understand everything we do, if it's not rewarded here, it will be rewarded there. We will be partakers of the glory of God, and that ought to be our greatest desire. That ought to be the thing that we're hungering after more than anything, is that we're going to receive the glory of God, and that glory is going to be revealed to us because of the way we serve and what we do. And so it's important to note that this is not addressed just to the pastors of the church only, but it's addressed to all those that are mature in the church that have been walking with God and have come. And so he says, okay, this is what the glory is going to come because you're suffering with him. He said, and I'm writing to you first. He says, tend the flock of God. Your job is to shepherd the flock. Okay, now this is very unique to us in some ways, because in the last probably 100 years, we've kind of went back to Catholicism a lot, even in the Protestant church. We went back to a very Catholicism way of doing things in the church, where we've made ministry back to a pyramid where it points back to one person or to just a select few of people. But that's really not what the church was about, especially in Peter's day. In Peter's day, shepherding the flock was more than one man. It was made up of the elders or the people within the church that were mature in the Lord to watch after one another and to build up this community of faith. And so it was a more of a thing going on, or a community thing that was going on. And so he says this is your obligation, and you must do it not because you have to, but you do it willingly. He says willingly, in other words, voluntarily. You give yourself to serve this congregation. You give yourself to serve. Now, when he's saying congregation or talking about the flock, we had to get out of our mindset of a church, just a congregation of few people. This is a city he's talking to, and so these are multiple people. It's almost kind of like we've come into the new way of doing things, where we have campuses. You've heard of some churches, they have different campuses. Well, that's kind of what the New Testament was like, even though they didn't call it that, because they had not broken it down the way we do. You were just a Christian. You were just part of the church. There wasn't no denomination. You weren't Baptist, Methodist, or anything. You were just the church. And even most of the Bible is saying that you're neither Jew nor Gentile. You're just the church. And so when he's telling them this, the flock could have been a great number of people. I mean, there's no telling how many it was. And so they're distributing this leadership among them. And he says this were to be something that you do willfully, that you do voluntarily. This were to be something that is an honor for you to do. And you do it with a heart for God, to watch after the sheep, to take care of the sheep. Now, all of us that has been in church long enough to know, and probably know a little bit, to be a good shepherd, what has to stay alive and be healthy to be a good shepherd? the sheep. Okay, if the sheep aren't healthy and they don't stay alive, you're not a good shepherd. Okay, matter of fact, if they don't stay alive, you're not a shepherd at all because you don't have no sheep, right? So for the shepherd to be acting right, to tend in the sheep, means that the sheep have to be taken care of. Now, Dale and Carla have sheep, and if you talk to Dale about his sheep, what really excites him is the time when birthing season comes. Okay, how many little sheep can I get? That's what really excites him. He's not excited if he's got 30 head of sheep this year, and next year he has 30 head of sheep. That doesn't excite him. Okay, he wants there to be new birth. He wants there to be growth within the flock. Now, he's going to sell them off, so he probably don't keep the growth. But he wants there to be growth because that's a healthy flock, and that's what's helped making the shepherd happy. Well, he's going to talk about our chief shepherd. Well, what makes the chief shepherd, Jesus, happy is to have new birth. Well, what brings new birth is that we, the elders, we, the mature believers, we, the leaders in the church, and leaders, not just leaders in the church are taking care of the flock, fostering the flock, tending the flock, and creating an environment where we can grow and have new birth within the church. That's what really tending the flock is all about. It's not tending the flock just to stay pat. That's not tending the flock, because it's not a healthy flock if there's not new birth, if there's not growth. Because here's the thing about whether you're talking about sheep, whether you're talking about, last night I was watching an episode of the Discovery Channel talk about hyenas. It don't matter what it is. Here's what it is. Hyenas are a big family. You got a big flock of sheep, or you got a church. Here's the thing. People are going to die off. Sheep are going to die off. I guarantee you, Dale and Carla have had sheep that got old and they died. Or some wild animal got them. Yeah, well, they don't get old too long. Dale gets rid of them. But he figures them down the road. But maybe they got a disease, or maybe a wild animal got them. You're always going to have that where something in nature, and if you keep the flock long enough, they're going to get old and die. If you don't have new birth, sooner or later, your flock dies off. And once again, you're not a shepherd. The same happens in church. One of the reasons we invest in kids, we invest in youth, is because we all want South Decatur to be around. If Jesus waits another 50 years, we want there to be a South Decatur church in this city. Whether it's at 3103 or not, that doesn't matter. Wherever we are, we want there to be a thriving, healthy church. This year we celebrate 51 years on October the 6th, 50 years on 3103. We've been here 50 years. Some of y'all, that's hard to believe. 50 years we've been here at 3103. Dale was just a baby when they moved in here at 3103, not 51, 3103. Okay? But we want it to be here 50 more years. But if we don't invest in tending the flock together, not just pastor, but together, invest in tending the flock, we won't be here. We'll be like a lot of other churches that just got older and older and older and died off. And next thing you know, they put a lock on the door and the state office sells the property and there's no church no more. And I never want that to happen. I never, ever, ever. One of the things that has grieved me more than anything is my first church that I ever pastored closed down. When we left it, it was in such great shape. It was a vibrant church. The next pastor came in, and she did an outstanding job. It was a vibrant church. It was doing great. Then the next thing happened, and one thing after another, and next thing you know, it's closing down. And we went by there the other day when I was down preaching at the church, and I drove by it, and the grass is high, and it looks abandoned, and it just broke my heart because I thought about all the work and all the effort and all the hours that we had put into that and did everything, and all the people we saw come to Jesus. And I've told y'all this, out of that church, there's right now, I know 6 pastors that came out of that little church, and they're all pastoring great churches and doing great jobs, and yet that church is closed down. Why? Because they quit investing. They quit tending the flock. They quit doing the things they were supposed to do. And it wasn't even necessarily the pastor's fault that it went down. There was some problems and all kind of troubles, but that's the thing. If we don't tend the flock, if we in leadership, and when I say leadership, I'm talking about anybody that's leading anything, if we don't tend the flock, if we don't care for everything, I tell all the team leaders, from Sister Brenda to Pastor Aaron to guys in small groups, whatever look, you can't get caught up in your ministry is the most important ministry in the whole church. Because if you do, you'll kill your ministry by killing other ministries. And what I mean by that, Sister Brenda has kids. But if Sister Brenda don't have any concern about adults at all, guess who has kids? Parents. They're adults. And if we get them mad, they leave, guess what we have? We have no kids ministry. Well, Pastor Aaron can't say, well, that's kids ministry. I don't care nothing about it. Because guess what? His next generation is. Their youth are coming out of kids ministry. So he's got to care about it. Every ministry is built upon each other. We're all linked together. We have to tend the flock. And so we have to tend the flock. We have to create an atmosphere, an environment where new birth can come in, where we welcome people in, where we welcome people into the church, to where we can grow and we can prosper. And that's what he says. He says, hey, you tend the flock, he said, which is of God, which is among you, exercise an oversight. And he says, willfully, according to the will of God. Now, Pastor Aaron said this Monday night, and it was just powerful what he was talking about, because it's so true. When you hear the will of God, sometimes that's a very theological word. That's a very churchy word, will of God. Can I tell you, let me break it down real simple what the will of God is. Will means the desire of God, okay? Every one of you have desires, things you desire. That's God's will. God's will is the things God desires. That's why he loved David, because David was after the desires of God's heart. I want to know what you want, God. That's the will of God. If you can tap into what God wants, what is his desire for my life? What does he desire out of me? That's the will of God for your life. And so he says, hey, you're doing all this willfully according to the will of God, not with that selfish or filthy selfishness is what it is. In other words, not for yourself. A lot of times, if we're not careful in church, we want to lead, but if we're really honest, we want to lead because we want to shine. We want people. We want people. Have you ever had somebody that got promoted at your job, and when they got promoted, their whole attitude changed, and they went power hungry, and you went, what in the world happened to you? They just went nuts. They didn't know how to control it or handle it, and they're bossing everybody around, yelling at everybody, and just doing crazy stuff. Well, that's bad on a job. That's terrible in church, because that's not who we are. As leaders, we're servants. We're not lords. We are not masters. We're servants. And so we have to have a ready mind. That ready mind word there in the Greek means excited and passionate about what we do. That we have to be passionate about what we do. He says, neither as lording over them. We talked about that. The charge allotted you, but making yourself an example unto the flock. If you have a boss mentality, then you have no business in a leadership position in the church. You don't have no business leading. Because it's not about being the boss. It's about being the servant. You know, a lot of people don't know this, but if you study, there's a great book. I haven't read it in years, but it's a great book. I can't even remember the author right now, but it's called The Shepherds Look at the 23rd Psalm. And then he wrote another one called The Shepherds Look at the Good Shepherd Parable. And they're both really good books. And I would let you borrow them, but I let somebody borrow them, and I don't think I got it back. But it's a great book. It's an older book, but it's really good, especially if you want to do a study on shepherds. The guy was a Middle Eastern shepherd and got saved, got filled with the Holy Ghost, and he wrote this book. And it's just very powerful. Well, one of the things that you get out of it when you start reading it is that when we look at shepherds in the Bible, we look at them from a very almost romantic type way, because we look at them as being, you know, that's a shepherds, just angels came to the shepherds and all of these. And we look at them that. But in their time, a shepherd was like a ditch digger. I mean, nobody wanted to be a shepherd. You did not want your son to grow up to be the shepherd, because that was one step above the blind beggar, okay? I mean, that was you're a shepherd. You couldn't get anything other than that. Couldn't you go work at Jerusalem McDonald's or something? I mean, you're a shepherd. I mean, that's how bad it was. There was no glory in it. That's why when David got called to be the king, that's why his dad said, I don't have another son. And he said, are you sure? And I got David, the shepherd. I mean, because he was so low, they made him the shepherd. And that showed Jesse's kind of dishonor to David, because David was a shepherd in his father's house. And none of the other sons were shepherds, but David was. And which gives you, we don't have time for that, but it's a whole thing. So a shepherd was no glamorous thing to be. It wasn't a cool thing. It wasn't a great thing. It was horrible. You were a shepherd. You were the lowest of class. You didn't make no money. You were minimum wage guy, you know. I mean, you were the low man on the totem pole. And yet God talks about shepherds constantly, and what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to love. But here's the thing. Being a shepherd, you may be lowly, but being a shepherd, your whole job was to make sure the sheep are taken care of. Your whole job was to make sure that the sheep were looked after. Your whole job was to make sure the needs of the sheep were to be done. And that's what Peter's saying. He's saying, hey, that's what you in leadership are supposed to do in the church. And then he says something crazy. He said, and you as leaders, as elders, you're an example to the rest of the flock. When you're in leadership in the church, you become a role model, whether you want to or not. You're an example. Let's get back to what leaders is, or elders are, because sometimes we get that confused and we think, well, elders, yeah, all y'all leaders are supposed to be there. No, elders can mean mature people as well. If you've been in the church a long time, you're supposed to be an example. People are to be able to look at your life and say, that's what a Christian is. I'm going to live like that. And they ought to be good if they do. That's what Paul said. He said, if you want to get with Christ, follow me as I follow Christ. In other words, don't worry about trying to understand. Just do what I do. Live like I live. Now, don't answer this. Don't raise your hand. Don't give me no eye contact, okay? But how many of you would want somebody to live like you live? Would it get them to heaven? Because if it won't get them to heaven, it's not going to get you to heaven. I mean, could you look at somebody right now and say, hey, you want to get to heaven, you want to be fully invested in God, you want to be a fully devoted follower of Christ, just watch me live like I live. Talk like I talk, communicate like I communicate, work like I work, live like I live, worship like I worship, pray like I pray, read your Bible like I read my Bible. Do that, and you'll get there. Rubber starts meeting road right there, don't it? Guess what? There's people in your life that look at you like that. They might not tell you, but they're watching you. How do we get crazy heresy? How do we get people getting cults? How do we get people that used to be in church and now they're believing? Because every one of you that's been in church any length of time, you know people that used to be grounded in church and now they're living some crazy, stupid belief. Oh, you ain't got to go to church no more. And they were raised in the same church you were. How did they get there? They followed somebody. Somebody they followed and they said, hey, I'm going to live like they live. And they wandered off. They wandered away because it's easier to live that way. So here he's saying, you're an example to the flock. Can people look at you and no, it doesn't mean you're going to be perfect, but you know what? Sometimes your imperfection can lead people in the right way as long as you admit that. Now, you can't act like you're perfect when you're not and let them see that, because then that gives them a false narrative of what Christ is, and they start thinking they can do that. No. You got to be willing. Look, I believe in parenting. Now, y'all may be different. Y'all may not have done this, and that's fine. But I believed even in parenting that it was my responsibility to sometimes tell my kids I messed up. Say, hey, messed up right there, lost my head a little bit, got a little too excited, or got a little bit. Now, Brother Jim, I didn't like doing that. I had no desire to do that. But God told me, hey, they need to know that sometimes even as a parent, even as a dad, you mess up. You miss it. You miss it. Now, I wasn't raised that way. I don't think my dad ever thinks he messed up. I don't think he ever does. And if he does, he never told me. But I felt because I wasn't just their father, I was their pastor. And I couldn't let them go thinking this was okay when I knew it wasn't. And so it's something God convicted me of. And I had to do that because I was the example they lived by. And so we've got to be an example sometimes. And sometimes that just means telling people that we know are following us, hey, I missed it right here. I didn't do. You know, last week, I appreciate Sister Joanne for taking care of. I was invited to I was one of 20 pastors in the Church of God invited to the general office to be a part of the Thrive program, which is a mentoring program for young pastors. And one of the things that I've always done with young pastors is not just told them where I succeeded, but I tell them where I messed up. I missed it right here. You know, there was a time in the first church I pastored, I should have built a church and moved our church. We should have moved. And you know, when I looked the other day and saw that church closed down, I realized some of that's on me because I should have moved that church when I was down there. I knew I should have. God told me to. But I let people talk me out of it. And I should have went on with God. I had people that would have done it. We were ready. And I did. And I was young and I made a mistake. And I've told Pastor, I said, look, I blew that. I just missed it. I got scared. I got fearful. And I listened to people. And next thing you know, we didn't do what we were supposed to do. We can miss it sometimes. And so being an example is sometimes talking about that. He says, when the chief shepherd shall be manifest, ye shall receive a crown of glory. Now, you're going to receive a crown of glory that fades not away. You're going to receive a crown of glory because you've done it the right way. Now, if you're up here as a leader, I don't care if you're a team leader. I don't care if you're leading somebody as a mentor. I don't care if you're a pastor, elder, councilman, whatever you are. If you're doing it and you're getting glory out of it, enjoy it, because that's all you're getting. If you give, you know, and maybe we got, you know, right now we got kids project going on, and you give a big giant amount and you want everybody to know it, hey, we'll take your check. We're glad to. But enjoy your reward, because that's the only one you're going to get, you know. Now, there's nothing wrong if somebody honors you and they knew you've done something, but that shouldn't be your motive, you know. We've all done something nice for somebody and they were thankful. Maybe somebody found out and said, oh man, that was a great thing you did. There's nothing wrong with that. But honor comes from other people. I don't go out doing things for honor. You see what I'm saying? If somebody gives me that, and the church should honor people, the Bible tells us to show honor where honor's due. It tells us that constantly. But I don't know about you, but how many of you, when people are really making over you, and you know they probably should, like your kids giving you, you know, your kids ought to buy you something for your birthday or Christmas or whatever. They ought to honor you for Father's Day, Mother's Day, whatever it may be. They ought to honor you, whether they buy you something or do something for you, however they do it, they ought to do that. But how many of you sometimes feel uncomfortable with it? I always do. I always feel uncomfortable with it. I'm just like, you know, my kids will buy me something. I'll think, y'all don't need to buy me. No, I got that. Y'all need your money for this. Y'all should be doing that. And they always get mad, Daddy, we got it. We got it. But it just makes me feel, but you know what? That's it. But here's what Jesus said. Peter said, he said, but if you're doing that for the church to get honor, you better enjoy that. He said, but your honor is going to come that you're going to receive a crown of glory that fadeth not away. Because you know what I found out about honor here from people, as good as it is, it fades away. It don't last. Because the same people that's talking great about you, one day, if you're not careful, you know, they'll be dogging you out 2 days later. I mean, if you do something that don't right, or even if they don't, they forget about it, they get caught up in life, and next thing you know, it's taking you for granted. Your kids may, or they buy you something, it's super nice, but a year from now it falls apart. I mean, it fades away, no matter what it is. But he said, I'm going to give you a crown that never fades away. I'm going to give you something, and it's a very eschatological statement, a very end-time statement that he says. So he's saying here that so all of us as mature Christians are an example. We're spiritual role models for the younger people in the church. And Jesus says by doing this, you're going to receive a crown of glory, okay? He says a crown of glory when the chief shepherd comes. He says, likewise the younger be subject unto the elders. Yea, all of you gird yourself with humility, okay? Now, subject here, we talked about this a few weeks ago. Subject here is a military term, hypotasso, and hypotasso is a military term. It means willingly submitting, willingly to be subordinate to. So in other words, he's saying humility is a choice. Now, I've found with God there's two ways that humility comes in my life. Number one, I choose to be humble. Number two, God chooses to humble me. I don't like the second one because it comes with a very uncomfortable situation in my life when God decides He's going to humble me. It is perceived by something really bad happening in my life that brings me to a humble position. But I can choose humility. Humility is an attitude. To humble myself. To humble myself, he's going to say later on. But humility, to come under that. So I am to humble myself out of choice. And in doing so, God lifts me up. And God blesses me. And God touches me. He said, younger, humble yourself. And then he tells us all, or to be subject rather to the elders. Then he says all of us gird ourselves in humility. So submission is all about my choice. Now that doesn't mean I like everything that I submit to, right? I don't like everything I submit to. Where you work, you don't like doing everything they tell you to do. I mean, I guarantee you there's jobs that you go, I don't really want to do that. But you want to get paid. And if you want to get paid, you submit. I guarantee you, Todd, at the police, when they put that big pile of paperwork on his desk, he's not excited about that, you know. He's not excited he's got to do all that paperwork, but keep up with all the things he does. And you say, how do you know he does paperwork? He's a police officer. He does paperwork. I guarantee you. It's paperwork. That's not the exciting part of it. That ain't what you've seen on TV that made you want to go out and be a policeman, you know. All of us have that. Well, in the spirit, there's things. I have an overseer who's my pastor. I don't always like to do everything he asks me to do. It ain't always something I really want to do, but I submit, and it's a choice because I'm submitting to God. I'm coming under the authority of God. In our group on Sunday night, we're talking about undercover, coming under the authority of God. By coming under the authority He's delegated in my life. And so Peter says, hey, submit. So younger ones, you need to submit to authority. And that's something we have a problem in our society, submitting to authority, but that's a part of it. You know, as a Christian, we ought to always be submissive. You know, if I get pulled over by a police officer, which thank the Lord I haven't in a long, long time, it doesn't matter if the guy's younger than me. I'm yes sir and no sir. I'm submissive because he's in authority. Not because he's got a pistol, but because he's got a badge. He's in authority. And so I'm submissive to that. And so I'm really going to be in the spirit where God's got people to be submissive to those. So he says, God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. So if you want grace, it comes from the humble. Now note in chapter 4, Peter said judgment starts in the house of God. But Ezekiel 9 says, from men who were elders inside the house of God does judgment begin. So not only does judgment start in the house of God, but guess what? If you're in a leadership position, judgment starts with you, with us. It starts in us. So be careful when you say, well, I want to be in charge of something, because judgment's going to start in you. The way you lead, the way you taught a class, every word you said, every word you taught, every word you preached. God said, I'm judging that. I'm going to judge you for how you led my people. I'm going to judge you for how you tended my flock. I'm going to judge you for how you were a councilman. I'm going to judge you for how you were stewards of the money. I'm going to judge you by did you use it to win people to God. I'm going to judge you, did you want my church to grow. I'm going to judge you for all of that. It's going to start with you as a leader. I'm going to judge you how you parented. I'm going to judge you how you... So he's putting all this stuff in there. So what Peter is doing here is, because of the suffering of the church, he's sharing how unity is built within the church through godly servant leadership. Not just one man or woman, but a team of leaders that are operating in the Spirit of God and then the spirit of servanthood to the church body, and setting an example of what a Christian should be. So what we see is that godly leadership creates an environment or an atmosphere of unity where the church can thrive no matter what outside situation they're going through. And that's what he's talking about. But then he shifts gears a little bit. He says, humble yourself, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, and be that he may exalt you in due season. So Peter goes from talking about elders to talking about the entire community. He talks about the leadership within the community. Now he's talking about the entire community. He says, number one, every one of you should humble yourself under the mighty hand of God. Humility starts with God. We humble ourselves to God. You can't be humble to man if you can't be humble to God. It's the way it is. And so it's humble ourselves unto God, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your anxiety or worry upon him because he cares for you. So Peter makes this is very powerful. Peter makes this link between humility and worry. Peter says, if you humble yourself to God, he'll exalt you, and you can cast your care, your worry on him. But so if we flip that around and say, if you're not humble to God, if you don't humble yourself to God, then you can't cast your worry upon him. Could it be that we deal with worry and anxiety and all these things so much because we're not humble to God? Let me share something I wrote today for something that I was asked to do. With all the shootings, and that's become a hot topic with El Paso and Dayton and what's going on. And there's all kind of views, and I don't want to get into that because a lot of people that have views, it really isn't important anyway. And half of them don't believe what they're saying to begin with. But they politicize it and use it for their agenda and all that. But the root of the problem, in my opinion, only my opinion, so you can take it and throw it away if you want to, but the root of my problem, in my opinion, is that we have no value. We have devalued life in our country. Now, it didn't start with the Abortion Act in the 1960s. It went way beyond that. It started in the 1800s with a man by the name of Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin came up with a theory called evolution. It was a theory. It's still a theory. Nobody's ever proved it. Darwin really didn't even he stumbled on this, and it became much bigger. If you read Darwin's later in life writings, you'll see that even Darwin doesn't know if he believes what he wrote. But Darwin sees microevolution. There is evolution in our world, microevolution. A tadpole evolves into a frog. That's evolution. It's microevolution, not macroevolution, but it's micro. It happens on a very small level. But Darwin's theory was, if this happened in a micro situation, it must have at some time happened in a macro situation. In other words, that mammals became what we are humans today. And so he traced that back that we started in this cesspool, whatever it was, I don't know. I get into it with evolutionists, and I always say, well, who put the sails in the water? I mean, okay, we bumped together, but who did that? That still had to be God, if y'all, believe. And so anyway, but Darwin comes up with this theory. Society takes the theory and takes off with it. So much so that now we teach evolution as a true principle, even though there's no evidence. And if you got evidence, there's a guy, a billionaire down in Florida that'll pay you $250,000 right now if you can show him one shred of evidence that evolution is still operating today or ever was on a macro level. Nobody's ever got that money in over 25 years. Because there's no proof of it. There's never been proof of it. There's no proof of it. There's no half monkey boys running around. Okay? Never is. We can explain race. Race is easy to explain. If you look at Ham, Shem, and Japheth, you see where they went. You see where race. We know that environment creates culture. If you stay out in the sun long enough, you're going to get dark, and within generations there. Did you know that two brown people can have a white child or a black child? I don't know if you know that. But two brown people can have. Do you know what the majority of people in our world, what color their skin is? Brown. So it's probably easy to understand that Noah and his wife were brown. And if you look at the word Ham, Ham means dark-skinned. Japheth means light. Shem means common. So Shem was probably brown like they were. Japheth was probably white, which Japheth went to Europe, and that's where his people resided. Ham went to Africa. That's where his people resided. Japheth stayed in the Middle East and was the descendant. Shem stayed in the Middle East and was the descendant of Christ. Jewish, brown. That's just a genealogy right there, folks. So anyway, we get back to Darwin. He comes up with this, and we take off with this theory. We run it. Now we teach it as a principle, and it's never been a principle. But what it done, it devalued life. It took God out of the equation. So we didn't have to humble ourselves to God anymore because we were God. So rather than God creating life and man being created in the image of God, we were an accident. Right? We bumped together in the pool. Two cells came together. Next thing you know, we crawl out of the cesspool. We become monkeys. Monkeys become men. And that's how we got here. It was all accident. It was just chance happened. 1 in a billion. It just was chance. This took place. God wasn't involved in it. No God, no special. So now we look at man not as being special because he's in the image of God, but guess what? Man's no different than anything else. Man was an accident. So man is no more important than the dog, than the cat, than the tree. And so now we can look at man, and not only is man not important, but now we got a group of people that say man is the problem for all society. If the world just didn't have people in it, it'd be a great place. Hey, there's a group of people that think that way. They think that if we were gone, it'd be a great place. So guess what? We devalued life because we devalued God. We quit humbling ourselves to God. We quit submitting to God. And so now life has no value on it. So now we can murder millions and billions of kids, unborn innocent children, and that's okay because life had no value. We can have a governor of Virginia that sat down with a straight face today, straight-faced, yesterday actually, and said that a doctor should be able to exterminate a child even after birth if he thought it was best for the family. With a straight face he said that. You know what? No value in life. So we went, and look where we progressed. We went in Roe versus Wade to if a mother was in trouble, if a mother was unhealthy, if it was her, that we could do an abortion. Guess what? 99% of abortions have nothing to do with the mother's health. It's merely inconvenient. Did you know that in Planned Parenthood, over 80% of all abortions are on black females? Did you know that the person that founded that place, that founded the pro-life or that movement of Planned Parenthood, was a person that said that abortion could control the African American population? It's genocide. Genocide. It's out of control. But you know what it all comes down to? Greed. It's money. It's money. Because when that poor, and you know, sometimes if we're not careful, we get to demonizing the poor women. And I know they have a part in it, but some of these are young teenage girls, and nobody tells them the consequence. Listen, I've counseled with young ladies that have went through an abortion and were devastated because nobody told them the guilt that come with it. Nobody, and guess what? That doctor that done it, that was so hands-on and so loving, it wasn't there anymore once he got the check. The politician that was all pro-life, the protester, they wasn't around anymore when that poor young lady had to come out of that and had to live with that. Or they done something to her. And do you know a good percentage of women that have abortion can't ever have a kid again? They don't tell that. Why? Because there's no value of life. We've devalued life because why? That verse, we no longer humble ourselves to the mighty hand of God because we've created a world where there is no God. So if there's no God, then we're not in the image of God. And so now it's okay. And so we've raised up a generation, not to mention, we could talk about the movies that have violence on them, crazy. And then we'll have some Hollywood actor tell us how we shouldn't have guns. I shouldn't have got off on that we shouldn't do this and we shouldn't do that. And then he goes makes $1 million or $10 million, $20 million, making a movie where he shoots everybody in sight. We make games. Listen, one of the leading games in the last 20 years is a game where you shoot, you rob, steal cars, rape women, and shoot police officers. It's called Grand Theft Auto. Billions of copies. And they tell you, well, we don't let kids play it because we put a sticker on the side of it. Yeah. So we keep little kids from playing it because we put a sticker on it. I know 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds that have played that game. And then we wonder why we got people going into school shooting them up. We've romanticized it, violence, and we've devalued life. Because why? We quit humbling ourselves to the mighty hand of God. We took God out of it. And Peter is telling the church, listen, you've got to be humble to God. You've got to choose to humble yourself to God, or you get a warped view of everything. Because when the society, when mine, when yours, when our view of God is distorted, our whole view of life is distorted. And that's the world we're living in. Because we took God out of the equation. That's why we have more people on antidepressants in our country than we've ever had before. Do you know that 76% of all addicts are functioning addicts? Did you know we think about crack and cocaine? Do you know one of the leading addictions in this country is prescription pills? People are addicted to prescription painkillers and all kind of things like that. That leads to, when they can't get any anymore, that leads to heroin and different other drugs that they have to do. Why? Because they become addicted to this. And it all started, most of them started by some crazy thing that they got. Anxiety, some kind of disorder and all that. Why? Because we don't humble ourselves to God. And we've created a society full of anxiety and worry and all of these things. Because here's what he said, be sober, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion walketh about seeking whom he may devour. Sober means to be, listen to this, and I got to close, but listen to this. Sober means to not drunk, okay? Sometimes we think, well, that means don't get drunk. I'm good because I don't drink. No, that's not what it means. That is one thing it means. But it means, sober means to be in control of what influences your emotion and desires. To be in control of what influences your emotions and your desires. That's to be sober. What's influencing it? Because here's what he said. If you're not sober, the devil is like a roaring lion. You know what a lion does? A lion looks for the weakest link in the flock. A lion will set and watch a herd, and he will pick out the youngest or the weakest, and that's the one he attacks. And so Peter says the way you keep the lion from attacking is to be sober. Be in control of what influences your desires, what influences your desires and your emotions. Be sober. So if you're one that loses your temper, you're not sober. Because you're not in control. Something influenced you that caused you to lose it. You bust the TV, kick the dog, slap the cat, spit in the fishbowl. That's not what God, be sober. Because that's when the enemy comes in to attack. And it all starts with humbling ourselves to God. When did the enemy attack our country? When we quit being sober. When we allow things to control. Have you noticed something about our country? If you start looking at this and really studying this, and studying how we started with Darwin, and we kind of lost it, and it just covered. We've come to a society that is an emotional wreck. right? I mean, people just are out of the sides of the wall crazy. You can't have a discussion with people anymore that don't agree with you. They start screaming and yelling and acting like crazy people. You know? Very few people can you ever have a conversation with. You know, Dale and I at the bus barn just lost one of the guys to cancer yesterday. He passed away. And he was a Democrat through and through, okay? But what I liked about him, and we become friends, is we had a lot of discussions, and we didn't agree on hardly anything politically at all. And he was an Auburn fan, so we really didn't agree on anything. But we could talk sensibly. Now, we get passionate about something. He would more than I would, but we could still have a conversation. But you know what? Most people you can't do that. They're emotional wrecks. They're living in anxiety and pressure cookers all the time. Why? Because we do not humble ourselves to God. We don't come under Him. And our society, when they quit coming under the God, the lion of the enemy, like a lion, he's not a lion, he's like one, come roaring in and put us on a path that, I'll be honest with you, when you look at our country, if we don't listen, and I'm bringing this really to an end, but this just hit me today. If we don't have a revival of holiness, guys, we fixing being a mess. I'm talking about, listen, and you say, oh, Trump gonna fix it. You can't fix this. You can't fix what we in. One man, one election can't fix this. It's like trying to fix the dam that's breaking with duct tape. I mean, you can't do it. If we don't get back to God having a sovereign move of holiness, and it's got to start in the house of God, to where He becomes important to us again, because we can blame everybody else. But Peter told us straight up, it starts in the house of God. And we've got too many people in church that if we were honest, if somebody lived the way we live, we wouldn't get to heaven. If we were honest, we'd have to say, well, I don't know if I'd want them living like me. Well, then you got to change. We live in a place where in the church, God's not the most important thing in our life. And if He's not the most important here, He's not going to be the most important out there in this nation. And if we don't have a revival of holiness and of the power of God where we humble ourselves back to God, He's going to humble us. He can't do it to Sodom and Gomorrah. He can't. Listen, God took His own people twice through 400 years of slavery. What makes us so special? Why wouldn't He do that to us? He's done it before. What do you think the Civil War was? It was a judgment of God. He took His hand off and said, okay, go. Y'all want to live that way? You want to walk in that? Here. The bloodiest war in our history. And that, I'm telling you, we've got to have revival. And listen, it don't start in the White House. It starts right here in South Decatur in this room. This is where it can start, right here. You say, Pastor, we're just small. It can start right here. 120 people got filled with the Holy Ghost in an upper room in Jerusalem. And that 120 turned the world upside down for Jesus without any technology. If they can do it, we can do it. Amen. God bless you. We'll start something brand new next.